All right, we're here with Endeavour, and we're going to talk politics and globalisation and how to solve some of the world's problems. Endeavour's done some great stuff in this area, putting out some interesting opinions and views and perspectives, and so we're going to talk about some of that and talk about some of the things that Tacitus Today has been doing, and see if we can get the anti-globalization message out to more people and more listeners and more viewers, and don't forget to subscribe to Endeavour's channel and to tell your friends and tell people you know, and let's fight globalization and get that message out there. I guess one of the things you mentioned, Endeavour, earlier on was the chat I had with Vince from Red Elephants, and he's quite a big player in the game now, and I think he's doing 3 or 4 videos a day. And I approached Vince and said, would he have time to have a chat? And I got a pretty small channel, and I know that these guys got a big channel often don't have time for the smaller players. But Vince very kindly agreed, and so we did a Skype. Unfortunately, the soundtrack didn't turn out so well, but it's posted on Tacitus channel, and I'll put a link down below there. But some of the things we talked about and that Vince was quite knowledgeable on was how the whole globalization, feminist, global warming, the rape epidemics, all these moral panic campaigns that are used to bludgeon white people and to prepare the way for globalization and mass migration. It all started, I believe, at least in the 1960s, and very slowly went on from there. It probably shifted direction and pace when the communist bloc collapsed in 1990-91. But do you have a view on that, Endeavour, on how, or on when it all began, how it was put together, and how it's come to where it is today, the steps involved, going back to the days of Ronald Reagan as governor of California? Do you have any sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is difficult to say when exactly the whole process started. I think that, what I look at my channel is I look at history and reactionary thought and kind of how it's progressed over the last couple centuries. And some can even make the argument that kind of the West's decline, you could make the argument that it's been going on for a while now. Some might say that it started with World War I, with really because it was just such a shock to the Western civilization was at its height in 1914, and that was just such a demoralizing shock to it. And then you can also look at after World War II. That I think that that's really where this all started to pick up. And yeah, I mean, kind of the civilization that had been built over the centuries. It was very clearly after World War II in its decline, and yeah, definitely the push for globalization and the push for kind of all the negative things that we're seeing right now. The push for kind of the breaking down of culture, the breaking down of borders, the liquidation of the nation state, of the breaking apart of just traditional society, religion, and all these things. Yeah, that's definitely been going on since the 1960s. It's picked up big time. Yeah, but it is difficult. It is difficult to say entirely when kind of negative things started happening, and it's also difficult to pinpoint exactly where it's coming from. But I think that I tend to think it's probably just a general civilizational decline. Like there's this great essay written by a British general named Sir John Glubb. He wrote this essay in 1970 about it's called The Fate of Empires, and it's an essay about how civilizations fall apart. He talked about the Roman Empire, and he also talked about the Arab Empire of Baghdad. And he had a lot of interesting insight that really rings true today. Like, for example, what he said in his essay was that an empire will only last around 250 years. And when it starts out, it's confident, it has the best men, that they have this pioneer spirit, they have this shared ethos, and they really really have this civilizational confidence. And then as it goes on, become more wealthy, they expand further, and it gets bigger and bigger. And then eventually, what he says happens is that an era of decline sets in. So eventually, it stops being about the expansion. It stops being about kind of this push for something greater, and then it becomes entirely about money. It becomes about the pursuit of material wealth rather than the pursuit of something greater. And I think that phase definitely kicked in post 1960. I definitely think that's the case. I'll also add that Sir John Glubb, in his essay, the he talked about the Arab Empire in Baghdad. What he talked about in the 9th century was that once Baghdad became the most wealthy city in the world, and the Arab Empire had essentially reached its height, what he said was that it became affluent, but then it became decadent. So what he said was that there was a decline in religiosity, and this was under Islam. You have to remember, this was an Islamic empire. There was a decline in religiosity. He said that there was an influx of foreigners. So since it was the wealthiest city in the world, Egyptians, Persians, Greeks, all ended up in Baghdad. They were attracted by the wealth. He said that there was a lack of morality in that. Quite interestingly, what he had pointed out was that there was these musicians at the time, and they would play these really sexualized songs and these really sexualized dances. And then, the leaders of the city wanted to kick them out because they said it was undermining their morality. And then he also said that it actually became feminist, that there was actually women entering the positions that were traditionally held by men. And this was the dying days of the Arab Empire of Baghdad. And eventually it was invaded by mercenaries and destroyed. So, yeah, that's a really interesting essay for anyone that wants to look into kind of the decline of the West as many of us on the internet see it today.
There's a few good books around on that. There's Paul Kennedy. I think it's called The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. There's also Professor Barbara Tuchman, The March of Folly, which covers also some of those issues. And there's some other good books. There's even some books going back to like the 1600s. I think it was by Carlo Supponi, who was writing about the decline of Spain in the 1600s, and he came out with the prophetic sort of thing, that statement that those who can do something about it will not, and those who will do something about it don't have the power, so they cannot. And he said that's the thing of all great empires, that they decline like that. And even in the Roman Empire, if you read Tacitus and Suetonius, they talked about the moral decay of Rome, how the ballet dancers, dancing troops and gypsy dancing troops would come into Rome to entertain the masses, and how they would encourage, in the view of the writers of the day at least, encourage all sorts of debauchery and so on, which they believed was the beginning of the moral decay of the empire. I've sort of looked at empires over the years, and the Roman Empire sort of really began to show itself, I guess, in around 260 BC, and its decline became sort of fairly obvious in, I don't know, say 180, 190 AD. So it actually had a pretty good run. I mean, before it finally, or the Western Empire at least, died. It was sort of in the 300s AD, but then the Eastern Roman Empire continued for a while thereafter. The interesting thing in modern history has been the amount of time that the West Europeans have been really running the international sort of world order, typically from the mercantile age in the 1500s through to, well, still even today. And also, interestingly, is how the English-speaking people passed the baton from, say, Britain to the United States. In terms of modern history, though, I sort of I put a lot of work into this, tried to find out where this, because there's too much organisation that's gone into this globalisation. It's not just haphazard events and one group taking advantage of it, a development to exploit it for their own advantage. It's more organised than that. And in terms of the modern era, the right-wing think tanks of the late 1960s were looking for what they thought was the next economic frontier. So there was the post-World War II building boom. Then there was the consumer goods boom in terms of, say, consumer electricals, and things like that. And so they were looking for that. What's the next frontier? What's the next profit frontier for all this capital we got? And they decided getting women into the workforce was the next profit frontier. So it would create more workers, it would lower wages, but increase the amount of consumers. So if you're an international banker, that's the big trifecta. So they were pursuing that. And about the time they really started pushing for this was the time that the divorce laws started to change and women were encouraged to divorce. And there was all that propaganda about all men are violent, wife-beating, child abusers, and marriage is an evil institution. Women are better off out of it. All these sorts of things, and it's just way too much of a coincidence that all that occurred sort of around the same time. I noticed it doing a flight from. I had to go from San Francisco to London within sort of 1 24-hour stretch, and so I ended up getting the newspapers from the West Coast and the East Coast in New York when the plane stopped at JFK, and then again in London. And they all, on the same 24-hour period, all the newspapers had a story about how men, what 1 in 2 women were being beaten by their husbands, that sort of thing. Now, it was quite clearly propaganda, but in each case, the story was the same. It was just that the universities were changed and the alleged sort of academic study, the name of the professor doing it changed. But it was the same story in each newspaper with minor cosmetic name changes. So they were using the one boilerplate. So that's when it came home to me, just how much propaganda there is, but also how well organised and orchestrated and coordinated it is. So there has to be some sort of central organising body in the middle of this to get that much seamless sort of simultaneous type propaganda, all singing from the same hymn sheet at the same time. So that's what sort of got me thinking about, well, this has got to be internationally organised here, and people with a lot of pull and clout to be able to get different media organisations to all be saying the same, dishing up the same propaganda. So from that point onwards, you've got things like Governor Ronald Reagan signing the divorce law in California into law, and then within 3 or 4 years, the entire United States had gone with that same law. Now that law sort of had, because California's got something called communal law, where from the old gold rush days, where they could share in a gold claim, and so that communal law was used as the standard for divorce law worldwide. Now, that doesn't seem to make any sense, but there you have it. And things like when Reagan was president, he gave the amnesty to all those Mexicans. So it was during Ronald Reagan's era that as president that the migration proper began. Even though the Hart-Celler Act was in 1965, it was the mid 80s before you saw that appreciable uptick in Mexican or Central American as well as Mexican immigration. So I'm looking at all this thing. Well, hey, this seems to be rather organised, and I think it's just in pursuit of new economic frontiers. A bit like mass migration to the West is, you look at these peasants that are in Africa and parts of Asia and so on. There's about 4 billion, close on 4 billion peasants worldwide, and they don't even exist economically. They don't register anywhere. They're usually living hand to mouth in subsistence, agricultural type situations. Now 10 or 20% of the population in any country is involved in the economy. They're working in the public service or something like that. But that other 80%, they don't exist, and it's those people that the globalists seem to be trying to move into the West. The illiterate, unskilled, IQ 75 peasants, and those are the ones, because once they go to the West, they then do become part of the global economy, whether it's as a floor sweeper or whatever, it doesn't matter. But that's the only place they can go to become the world economy. It's no good getting the guy who's already got a couple of degrees, who's in Kinshasa or somewhere, and bringing him to the West, because he's already in the global economy. Might as well leave him where he is and then bring the peasants who will never get a job, will never do anything while they're in Africa, and bring them to the West. So I think it's just international finance chasing new economic frontiers, and because white people weren't going to wear it, being effectively replaced, they just invented all these, you're a racist, you're a bigot, and all these various laws and hate speech to cow the populace into accepting what's being inflicted upon them. I don't know what you think of that. Do you think I'm going a bit too far with that analysis?
No, actually, I think it is quite accurate to say that um, I think what we're seeing really from the globalists from globalism is that it's really an attempt to kind of break down all of society and monetize it. It's the commercialization of all aspects of life. So it's taking culture, it's taking relationships, it's taking all this stuff, and really trying to break it down, put a price tag on it, and sell it back to you. And there is one very good YouTube channel called Blackpilled by Devin Stack, which he goes over propaganda, and he reviews films mostly from the 70s and 80s, and it's pretty shocking the way he breaks down these films to show just how much propaganda there really was back then, preparing us for what we're seeing today. Like, for example, he made a review of a movie about abortion, and he very astutely pointed out that in the film there was one scene somewhere in the middle of the film where a perfectly healthy, happy couple that they have an abortion for no reason. I think it's just because the man is going off to fight in World War II or something like that, and the doctor just performs it, and then they never think twice about it. But then later in the movie, there was a young woman who was abused by her father, and then her father had impregnated her, and that the climax of the movie was the doctor performing the abortion on her. But what he pointed out was that they had just written off, like, because that was like a situation where people would think, okay, yeah, that's probably if a young girl was abused by her father, then that would be a situation where yes, that it would be justified. But then they completely kind of took it out of the viewer's mind that they just had a scene there where it was a couple that had no reason to get an abortion, just doing it out of convenience. And what he pointed out was that it really effectively destigmatized people to it. And yeah, when you do look into things, it is pretty clear that there is an agenda being pushed. There is a push from the elites for globalism, for mass immigration, for global markets, for feminism, for all this stuff. There is a very clear push for that. And I'm of the belief that what we might call cultural Marxism, or social justice politics. I mean, it's really just used as an excuse for that. It's really just used as an excuse to essentially break. Well, I mean, it's used as an excuse to extract money from the white populations in the West, and the transfer of that money to other hands, and to really justify this liquidation of our nation states. Really, that's really what it's used to justify. And I think that it's not inaccurate to say that I think that at the end of the day, globalism really is the real enemy. It really is the quest to essentially break down everything that that really makes life enjoyable, and monetize it. I think it was there is a very good book called Why Liberalism Failed by Patrick Deneen. And what one really interesting concept he goes over in the book is the concept of anti-culture. What he calls anti-culture. That is the lack. Your culture is the lack of a culture. It's a culture that's only defined by consumption. So for example, it's replacing It's replacing something like, religion. It's replacing that with, sports fandom, or replacing nationalism with Star Wars, like, Star Wars movies. People are because it's something that you can sell back to them. And yeah, that there is a pretty clear attempt by the powers that be, that this does seem to be the direction that they want our countries to go in. And I really think that is, I mean, I guess if we wanted to refer to Glubb's essay, like, I'd say that it's really the phase of Western civilization that it's shifted from being something greater. It's shifted from being a push for building this great civilization, for building a great culture, for morality, for all that stuff. It's shifted from that to simply the pursuit of money. And Glubb points out that this is the sign of that an empire is in its dying days, because the shift goes from being, from long-term oriented, sustaining healthy lifestyles, building something greater, just being making money, and it eventually devours itself.
Yeah, it does seem to be heading in that direction. The bit that, or among a number of aspects that annoy me, is that the people, the voters, haven't been asked, do you want this? And these are our policies. We're going to bring in millions of illiterate, IQ 70, black and brown immigrants. We're going to do such and such. We're going to sell off all the public assets to international financiers, who will then double the price of your access to water and electricity and so on. And they couldn't sell it. It's just an unsaleable proposition. So they couldn't tell the Western populations what they're going to do. So among the things that interest me is how our politicians and our political class so happily sold us out to the globalists, and kept it secret, and even made laws to help them.
There's plenty of great examples of this. Like, if you look back, for example, during in the 1960s in Canada, where I'm from, there was there was something. Our current prime minister, his father, so not Justin Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, he advanced a policy known as what became to be known as multiculturalism, which, of course, is forced down our throats all the time these days. But the justification that he used was that what he said was that because Canada originally was it was a British colony. It was an English-speaking country. It was mostly settled by settlers from the British Isles, and then a few from Germany also. But then there was also a large population in Canada that was French, settled from France, obviously, then in Quebec. And they have a history that dates back 400 years. But what they sold us in the 1960s was that multiculturalism, that what it was going to be is it was going to be a way of reconciling Anglo and French Canada. So it was going to be a way of being fair to both French and Canadian, both French Canadians and Anglo Canadians. It was a complete lie, though. What it actually was it meant that that Canada has no culture at all, and that those cultures are not valuable, and that they have no weight, and that and then top that with mass immigration, and really, we really have lost a lot of our original culture. Like, I mean, if you look at other major cities like Vancouver and Toronto, I'm originally from Toronto. Well, first of all, it's been a huge demographic shift there. There's hardly any more Europeans left in the city, and of the ones that are, many of them are very old. And the original culture of the British settlers that would have built that, I mean, it's pretty much been liquidated. And another example could be in the United States. Like, they told them in 1965 that the Hart-Celler Act, this isn't going to change America. It's not going to have any effect. It's not going to, I mean, what they would have said is, well, we're just opening the door to more people. Wouldn't we want more successful people in our country? And well, then eventually they said to them, well, after they could no longer uphold the lie that, it's not going to change the demographic makeup of America, they told them, well, it might, but it doesn't matter because we're all the same. And, if we all just work together, America, we will just get along. And nowadays, what they're telling them in America is that, well, you are going to be replaced. It will be bad for you, but you're white and you're horrible and you deserve it. So I mean, it's just kind of been like justifying it along the way, and you just see like these small lies that were told, 50 years ago, really coming back to bite us in the ass right now. And it is a very clear attempt to kind of just break down the nation state, break down our traditional cultures, and kind of replace it with something else.
Yeah, yeah. These politicians, they again, I'm intrigued that they would so happily sell out their own countrymen, but clearly they have, and they've done it without any remorse or conscience, and I can't believe they think it's a good thing, but somehow, and I've noticed how many politicians and their family, their children, their wives, their husbands and mistresses, and the whole thing, how many of them are given very well-paying jobs, mysterious jobs, in government quangos or in the finance industry. There was a case in Australia where one of the politicians, his wife was a part-time aerobics instructor and had no gifts other than maybe doing that. And as soon as he got some political job of prominence, she was given a job as special consultant, was the title, in one of the big multinational banks on $850,000 US a year. Now, if you look at sort of whether it be in Australia or elsewhere, you start looking at the relatives and the friends and the so on of these people. Many of them are working in globalist type organizations. Yeah, it could be multinational construction companies, multinational banks and finance and so on. So they've all been gifted jobs that their skills and abilities wouldn't have earned them in an open, competitive market, not even close. And so I don't know how much corruption is going on in background. I've got to assume it's quite extensive. There's another one I'm thinking of now. The guy, his son travelled to England and was immediately hired into a very senior role into a merchant bank stationed in England, and on it goes. So that suggests that there's a close relationship between those on the private sector side who are pushing the globalist agenda, and the political class that are happy to accept trinkets and pieces of silver in return for selling out their own people. I mean, that in itself's got to be a sign of moral decay. Just coming up on or picking up on the point you made about some of the cities in Canada where there's hardly any white folks left. I'm in an upper middle class area here, but just going to the local supermarket over the last few months, nearly all the people there have been replaced with mass migration. It can't be just an accident that it happened in that short space of time. So it's got to be a policy from a big chain. Now this big chain of stores is an oligopoly, so they've got very cartel pricing power, and they're protected by the government. Now, I believe there's relationships. I can't prove this, but I believe there's relationships going on where the government, in effect, is saying, well, we'll let you keep your cartel pricing power or your monopoly or your oligopoly or your cozy government supply contracts. We'll let you keep all that, but you have to do what we want. We're going to bring in a shitload of low IQ people, and we want you to create bullshit jobs for them, to get them off the street and somehow integrate them into the economy. I think those sort of things are going on in background, and again, things we're just not being told about. And so after going to the shop, I went across the road to the post office, and again the same thing. One white gay guy there, but and then going somewhere else, there's no one who speaks English. They're all people that don't speak English, and then there's clearly a policy to give these people jobs. You don't employ somebody in a service front desk who can't speak a word of English. You just don't do it. You'd be commercial suicide, but yet they're doing it, and it's widespread. And this suggests that there's there's a lot of coordination going on to desperately try and make the globalisation work. I don't think it is working. I think it's a catastrophe in the making. And these people that are facilitating it in government, but purporting to represent us, our politicians, they think they're going to escape being eaten by the crocodile, but the only thing that's going to happen is they're going to be eaten last. They think they're going to get away with this. They think that the Chinese, when they're running a show, are going to accept a bunch of Anglos running the international finance. They're going to accept it for a minute, and so these folks ultimately are going to get eaten themselves. It'll just take a bit longer for them to be consumed. I don't know. I don't know if I'm being a little fantastic in that assessment, but from where I sit, it certainly seems to be so.
Well, yeah, there's no vision for the future. It's just entirely the politicians lining their pockets in the for the short term. And I think that why is it that we kind of got into this position? It's that I feel that over the last century or so, Western civilization and our various nation states, they've kind of stopped being something greater. I made a video on Maslow's hierarchy of needs on really how it's really just kind of collapsed, and that in the 19th century, and I talked about 19th century Canada, there was really a vision for Canada. There was a vision for expanding the British Empire, for reaching these new frontiers, for just bringing this great civilization to the world. And they really had this civilizational confidence and this really and this drive. And that doesn't exist anymore. What it is right now is the drive of these politicians to just make themselves as wealthy as possible for their they'll have like 10 years in office, maybe be wealthy, then retire, and then you look at a lot of these EU politicians, they don't even have any heirs in many cases, and they're really just kind of leaving a disaster for future generations, really. And yeah, of course, it's not going to last forever, right? Because it simply can't. When you look at things like welfare policies, when you look at things like debt, when you look at all these problems that are building up, it is pretty clear that it's the long term being mortgaged for short term profitability by these by these politicians, by these corporations. And that, I think that's kind of why they want that they're pushing the policies that they are. There is no foresight. They don't have a vision for 2100. They don't have a vision for the next century. But I feel that if you look back, there was a time where people did have that vision. I mean, when in 1867, the Fathers of Confederation in Canada, they had a vision for a nation that would last. I think they had a vision that would last for centuries, and that no longer exists. There is no will to essentially carry on anything into the future. It is really just an effort to liquidate that and profit from it in the short term. The future be damned.
Oh yeah, I remember as a young, and I'm sort of in the first tranche or the first era after the baby boomers. That's when I sort of came into existence. But when on my first sort of career job, after like college and everything, and I was, in those days, the big corporations used to have things called cadet trainees. I don't know if they still do it, but that was one of the things back then. And so I was there with a bunch of other young folks, young guys, and we were all, very determined to do well, to work hard, to achieve, to excel, to meet the highest possible standards as we'd been taught in school and college and so on. And we'd sort of been brought up in an era which was pretty much strictly pass or fail. And so we were all very ambitious and dedicated, and we wanted to put our energy into being successful and to achieving things. And that seemed quite normal at the time. Not that everybody did it, but it certainly was an accepted view. But today, I'm certainly the average millennial. This is not all, but the average millennial would think that was rather quaint, if not misguided or even delusional for that matter. You don't work that hard. You don't dedicate. Pass or fail. What's that? Everyone gets a first prize, and so on. So it's completely changed, and so that energy to achieve and succeed, which when you've got millions of people thinking that way, it feeds into the economy, and when you suddenly lose that energy, that commitment, that drive, then energy and so on. Once you lose that, then the effect on the economy is obvious, and so the only way an economy can stay prosperous is to keep on going to debt and artificially inflate the economy with non-productive appreciating assets such as domestic real estate and residential real estate and that sort of thing. So there seems to be a huge difference there, and it's kind of scary. And I did I'm doing a vid on this, but I did a talk a few years ago. I did a talk to some high school graduation kids who'd been like 17 or 18 years old, and there was a couple of boys in there that looked like they would turn into something, but the majority of the kids they were consumed with a sense of entitlement. Particularly the girls, they could give you chapter and verse as to how the kids' fairy tale Rapunzel was oppressing women and was a wicked patriarchal plot and yada yada, but they couldn't spell or they couldn't add up.
Yeah, there is kind of you kind of see once people are so used to wealth, they really start to take it for granted. And I've said this before that all these things that what we could call like degeneracy or whatever you want to call it, it could never exist in a non-decadent society. Like you could not, in Canada in say like 1800, when they're just settling the land, when before it was even a country, back when it was a colony, like you couldn't have like transgenderism, you couldn't have feminism, you couldn't have any of this stuff because it's destructive, and it's a destructive civilizational force in that it causes the social framework to fall apart. And then, but as technology advances, people's you no longer really need that strict social code, and then eventually it kind of starts to loosen up, and then you start to get a lot of these a lot of this liberalization. But then eventually what happens is that that kind of overtakes it, and that cannibalizes it from the inside. So like you get to the point where you're so comfortable with the wealth that you have, and you're so comfortable with the lifestyle that you have, that you're not really willing to put in the work to maintain it, because you don't really because many times people alive today might not have even known that work. And you're really kind of stuck in a situation of kind of depreciation. Like, you can look at things like welfare. It's like, how do you get people off of that? Like, how does it ever like not stop expanding, especially under a democracy with, once you have like 50% of the population, as a net negative on the tax burden, how do you turn that around? Because people aren't going to, who are benefiting from free stuff, aren't going to give that up. But at the same time, that obviously can't go forever, because as that expands and it expands, it's eventually you're not going to be able to afford it. And yeah, you do kind of see that with with a lot of modern societies, that like there is a sense of entitlement that's kind of kicked in. And I think it is because we were just so used to this rich lifestyle that we've been living, and we don't really know anything else. I guess we obviously don't know the struggle that someone during, say, the Industrial Revolution would have had to go under, or even later than that. And it's going to be. I think we're already kind of starting to see the results in that. My generation, I'm a pretty young guy. We're not going to be nearly as rich as the baby boomers were. We're probably not going to be as rich as the Gen Xers, and we have no way of dealing with that, really. Like, there's no plan of actually dealing with that. Like, hardly anyone in my age group's ever going to be able to afford a house in the current market. It's very difficult to find a job. It's very difficult. Wages are stagnant. Prices keep going up, and this is a lot to do with the mass migration. But yeah, it's really just an unsustainable situation that we've been put in. And in many ways, this globalization project, it really can't sustain itself for very long, because eventually kind of the wealth is going to dry up.
a lot of that wealth artificial. I mean, I remember the first apartment that I rented as a kid, and I mean, these numbers are going to sound ridiculous now, but I rented this furnished apartment. It was a one-bedroom apartment. I rented this furnished apartment for like $19 a week. This is in a major city too, but that relative to wages, that was I think it was 11% of the average wage. I haven't got the figures in front of me, but I think it was around 11% of the average wage to rent that apartment, or the cost. But today, that same apartment, the exact same apartment, it's probably like the kitchen's been refurbed, but that exact same apartment is like 35% of the average net wage. So the cost of living, just the essentials of life, such as rent or mortgage payments, that sort of thing, the essentials of life have increased very considerably over the last 30, 40 years, that sort of time span. And the cost of living in the essentials, so rent, not so much transport, that's probably around where it was, but energy, energy in particular, and even food. A lot of people say, well, food's much cheaper now, but they play a little five-card trick with that, where they take out of season fruit and things like that and say, look how cheap it is, because now it's warehoused and artificially ripened, those sort of things. But if you actually look at, say, the cost of a loaf of bread, just a basic steak, or these sorts of things, milk not so much, but certainly everything else, the food is like 25% in purchasing power terms, 25% more expensive today than it was 35, 40 years ago, and rents are much more expensive. Electricity, gasoline or petroleum is much more expensive. So you look at the things you got to buy just to exist day to day, and they are way more expensive than they used to be. Now, the counter is that things like televisions. I remember a television was equivalent to one weekly wage when I was a kid. So you had to kind of save up for it. Whereas a television today, you can buy it for nothing. It's a mass-produced consumer item, and it's very cheap compared. But you can't eat or live in a television. So the mass consumer goods items, such as TVs and some of the electricals, they're cheaper, and some of the clothing. But equally as being cheaper, some of the quality is much less. So the ultimate cost of ownership is much higher. I was going through some of my old storage stuff a little while ago, and I pulled out a T-shirt that I'd bought when I was still in high school, actually, and the quality of the fabric, how thick it was double and triple stitched. I mean, it was real quality. It was made in Australia. Now, the same item that you buy for cheaper price now for just a few dollars at, I don't know, Kmart or something. A T-shirt now, the fabric's, there's not even any comparison in the quality and the thickness of the fabric. It's got a single stitch. It's cheap. The dye used in it is crap. So you're having to replace it every year pretty much, or every few months even. So the cost of ownership of these cheaper goods made in China and elsewhere, or India or somewhere, means that your cost of ownership is much greater. So in fact, it's not necessarily a saving at all. So the cost of living's increased, and as you say, your age group, you fall into that thing where the cost of living is so high, the amount of the critical mass of funds you need to get together to move it to the next step, such as purchasing property in a desirable area, that sort of thing, is so great that you need to be in the top fucking 1% of income earners just to be able to make that jump. And even then, you need to be in that level for years to amass the thing. But we've probably got ourselves into a bit of a negative state of mind here. Given that's the situation, what can we do about it? How can we change it? And what can we do to make a difference and stop these globalists from ruining our lives?
Well, it's difficult to say. I think that it's a mistake to think that it's just a matter of like winning an election. It's a mistake to think it's like a matter of just changing it overnight. I mean, the financial situation is one that we can't really opt out of, obviously. I'd say though that the the best thing that people can do is look for the things in life that that they want to break down, the things in life that they want to destroy, and to preserve those, maintain them, and promote them. Like an example could just be history, like the writing out of us being written out of our own history, like all the propaganda that there is out there. They're even saying in Europe now that Britain is a nation of immigrants, Germany is a nation of immigrants, and then they say that in Canada and America too, and then they'll also kind of just say that, well, anyone can be a Canadian, anyone can be an American. It's just a sticker on your passport. It doesn't mean anything more. And I think it's just like finding these things that matter, and maintaining them. I mean, that's what I really would like to do. It's reading great works from Western civilization, knowing the great art, and just maintaining that under this tide that's really trying to break it down. I'd say that that's what people can do today, and to really kind of push back on this kind of anti-cultural push. And yeah, I think it's difficult to say, but I think that what people really need to do though is just like look for those things that they're trying to destroy, and maintain them, and hopefully they're not able hopefully this kind of neoliberal globalist tide is not able to write out all the things good about life. And hopefully, it's not able to destroy all truth, goodness, and beauty in the world. A good YouTube channel is Steve Turley. What he talks about is conservative trends across the world, and he might be a bit more optimistic than I am. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm not like a big time black pill. I'm not a big time defeatist, but his channel is a good uplifter. And what he often says is that kind of this depressing globalist lifestyle, no one wants it really. And when people are actually given the opportunity, they do wish for a more traditional, a more hierarchical, more religious lifestyle. Like for example, in one of the most recent videos I had made, I talked about kind of one of my leftist family members, and essentially, he's all on board with the things like white privilege, and like the gender doesn't exist, and that white people are evil, and all this this leftist crap that he believes. And this is what's being taught in the universities, and this particular family member works in the universities. But this guy's more depressed than ever, and I think it's because he just has this worldview that just requires him to constantly like break things down, to constantly like look for the flaws at everything, and to reject everything that's of quality. Because if you have a worldview based on equality, well, then for something to be something to be good, then it needs to be better than something else, and that's why he really just can't accept it. But then I also pointed out though that there is still a drive amongst people, even amongst liberals, to really have something more traditional. Like for example, you'll still see people from across the world travel to cities like Rome, or to Budapest, or Vienna, or Athens, or all these cities, in Europe, these old European cities with old architecture, with history, with art galleries, and all this stuff. People still want that. I mean, that's something that has not been destroyed. People still have a drive for that, and there's still a drive amongst many people for just community and for identity. Like for example, a lot of liberals will live in, who talk about, diversity is our strength. A lot of them will live in homogenous neighborhoods. They'll live in, this gated community that's like 98% white or something like that. I mean, they still want to have kind of something that they kind of still want a feeling of belonging. And yeah, I do feel that there is kind of a drive in people for a more traditional lifestyle. And I don't think that this kind of this breaking down this kind of push to remove all that stuff, I don't think it's very human. I don't think that it's really what people deep down want. And I'd say that the best way to fight it is to have alternatives. So, if they're promoting this abstract, art with paint just smeared across a canvas, so that some bullshit like that, well, promote good art, become become versed in things like, I don't know, the Renaissance, or classical music or stuff like that, as opposed to things like the Ariana Grande, Kanye West, or whatever it's called, just nihilistic crap that they're promoting today. If they're saying that, if they're saying, feminism, the genders are the same. Well, I think there's a value in promoting that they're different and kind of like striving for that a more traditional lifestyle. I'd say that's really what people need to do if you'd like to counter this trend of globalism. I think it's just find alternatives.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look, I couldn't agree more. There needs to be a counter narrative, one that's based in fact. I mean, you mentioned the white history. I've noticed how every white icon is being attacked. Recently it was John Wayne, for goodness sakes. I mean, what a joke. But they're rewriting history so that every white icon, whether it be in science or anything at all, politics. They're trying to turn them into, they're all racist bigots. They were this, they were that, they were so and so's, and really the great inventors of history. It was their black lesbian housekeeper was really the one that invented it, and it wasn't the guy that did it. They're doing all these ridiculous things, and I don't know. Maybe young kids are buying this crap. The way they get the young kids and corral them up and to go and accost politicians, and so some 9-year-old girl is saying you have to do something because it's our future, and just spouting the talking points that the teacher who's a NGO trade union hack has given them to spout out. But so there needs to be a counter narrative. Politicians must be held to account. If you don't want to represent the people, then you're not going to be in Parliament. You have to get out, and people have to be voted in and elected that represent the people, not that represent the globalists. Other things too, like the accountability. That Jussie Smollett story. Just hang on a second. That Jussie Smollett story. That was an example where the media jumped all over it without a second's thought. You wonder if it was all a setup, actually, but they jumped all over it, and the accountability for those people out there who are telling these grotesque untruths and pushing this obviously false narrative. There needs to be accountability and chased up, and this we need, like, if we're well enough organised in the alternative media, we can, through social media, we can make these people accountable if we're organised enough to do it. So there are a number of things need to be done. Maybe we need to set up a history channel so that recounts European white history as it really was. Giving the hard facts that there were some great achievements there, and also I did a video on slavery where 2% of the total historical timeline of slavery was taken up by white slavery. Yet you'd think, listening to the pundits in the media, that whites were the only people that ever did it, which is quite absurd. So there are so many things we need to do, but maybe your viewers and listeners have got some ideas. What can we do? What would you like to see? And would you like to see a dedicated history channel? Things like that. Put your comments below, and let's try and do some pushing back against the globalists. And if you like this video that we've done, say so, and we can do some more. And let's see what we can do about changing some of the things that we're not happy about, and doing it on a positive note. Endeavour, thanks so much. Looking forward to doing the next one, and I hope we meet your viewers' high expectations. And let's start putting together the material now for our next video, because I'm pretty sure there will be one, and I'm going to be looking forward to it.
Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'll do it anytime.
Okay, you take it easy. Bye now.